Hey, everybody. Welcome to What Fresh Hell, Laughing in the Face of Motherhood. This is Amy.
And this is Margaret. And today we're talking about and asking the question, how involved should we be with our kids' school?
Oh my gosh. This is one of those topics. I look forward to getting into it with you, but I feel like this is one of those you can't win things. If you're not involved
100%.
enough, they don't like you. If you're too involved,
They really
don't
like you.
And then there's a third thing once your kids get older, which is how involved should you be with your kids while they're at school, which is obviously very little, but
You mean when they're at college?
No, I mean sending, my high school kid a quick text during the middle of the day to be like, hey, just letting you know the dentist thing got pushed back 10 minutes, but you're interrupting them during math class, but they're not supposed to be looking at their phone. It's supposed to be in their locker, and yet they have
if
it.
If that's against the rules, don't tell me, because I do that all the time. Just did it. Kid forgot lacrosse stuff. Okay, you forgot you've got,
right,
which I always call rehearsal after school. It's practice. I have to get that word in my mind. I'm always like, you have a lacrosse rehearsal after school, because I'm such a theater kid at heart. But Amy, before we dive in, let's hit the mailbag. This one, it's not really a mailbag. It's a vertical mailbag, a horizontal mailbag. It's a review mailbag, to be honest.
It's an indirect message to us, but we loved it.
It's an indirect message. No one was trying to contact us, and yet here we are. We have been asking, begging, bugging you all to leave us some reviews wherever you listen to the podcast. And one of our listeners really came through on Apple Podcasts saying, title got me through a lot. Amy, number of stars, would you like to guess?
It's 5. It's 5 stars.
5 stars. The humor and humanity of this podcast has seen me through a lot. Living far away from family and with no friends with kids around, Margaret and Amy have been my surrogate mom friends through the pandemic and beyond. Genuinely funny and insightful. Look forward to every new episode. And that's from Hannah on Apple Podcasts. Thanks, Hannah.
Thank you. That is such high praise, because I think funny and insightful, that's always been, for 8 years now, that's been our strike zone, right? Like funny, you're going to enjoy listening, and you're going to learn something, hopefully, from every episode. That's what we go for. So I'm glad it's working for you, Hannah.
Huge. This review is huge. I mean, huge. All right. So let's talk about how involved we should be. I looked into this topic, and as often happens to me, I thought I was going to discover something and discovered something quite different. I think I thought what it was going to say is, oh, moms, chill out, stop snowplowing everything and being overly involved.
And there's plenty of that out there.
Portal every 10 minutes. And there is plenty of that out there. And we will be talking about that. And I feel like we have talked about that quite a bit. But there is another side to this. So let's talk first of all. Expectations about this have really changed. From rocketcitymom.com, here's a little study that says in the 1970s, only about 20% of mothers had college degrees.
Mm-hmm.
We also know
the fathers were at work.
Anecdotally, that the fathers were not even part of this equation,
Right.
And so the expectation was that school was school. Home was like feeding and home, and that never these things should even want to overlap. The expectations was like moms didn't know how to do this stuff, that moms couldn't help and dads wouldn't help. That's what I would say.
Yeah. My kids go to a high school. Well, my 2 sons went to a high school in New York City that is very academically rigorous. And anyway, I've heard the story many times, although it predates our year sending our kids there, that, the principal would meet the parents on the first day and be like, we'll see you at graduation. Shake your hand. Like, you're not coming back into the building. I'm not going to talk to you. You're not going to hear from me. Like, this is how it's going to be. And we're basically saving these kids from these, as you say, 80% of parents without college degrees and taking them somewhere else to be educated. See you in 4 years. And the parents were like, thank you so much.
Right. Because the idea of education, not the idea, but there was certainly an idea of upward mobility built within education.
Right.
That education would take you farther than where your parents started.
Right.
That, like, my grandfather ran a diner and his son went to law school. Like, that was the model back then, right? And the idea was like the parents were not part of the equation because the whole point that they were sending them in was to learn things that they didn't know.
Right.
That's changed completely.
Yes.
More anecdotally, my Aunt Terry used to say, when she talks about this whole thing of like, oh, I was at the PTA meeting and I was at this and I was at that. She's like, this is what we did. We sent the kids to the nuns. The nuns took care of it. And the nuns did not want your opinion. And the idea that you would give your opinion to the nuns was absurd.
Yes. I mean, I was a product of this type of education, and I had some amazing teachers for sure.
Mhm.
And then I also had I had one teacher I'm thinking of in particular that I really had a hard time with. And I remember talking to my parents about it, and it just was a different time, right? Like, that's, they'd say like, oh, that sounds rough. We just have to keep trying. But the idea that they would like ask to sit down with this teacher and say, you really
Give
like picking on
poor
our kid
little
during
Amy
class.
Wilson a break. Yeah. Never.
Which she was, what just didn't enter any of our minds. I also wasn't like, why won't you talk to her for me? It just wasn't a thing that was possible.
Not a thing. And what I think there are pros and cons. And we've talked about this in a lot of places. Like, women can be anything they want to be. Hooray, but also, oh no.
Right.
Like, now we have to, take care of the home and work full time and have a side hustle and look like J-Lo, even though we're 55. And, that the openness has pros and cons. That it used to be, I think, a little bit easier to say, we drop you off at school, the school knows best, and off you go.
Yeah.
And yeah, that all of those institutions, I mean, church used to be this way, that, I remember somebody at a parish in our town, there was a problem, and her mom said, you like talked back to a priest, like basically that's saying like this thing that happened at the church was unacceptable. Like, you would never, ever confront anybody, a priest, a teacher, a doctor, with actually, right? That just didn't happen back in the day.
It's just like back when like movie stars were movie stars and they were different than the rest of us.
Yeah,
so we're teachers and priests
We
and
didn't
nuns and
ever want to
principals.
see pictures of them shopping. They were
No.
just up on the silver screen.
They did not pump gas. They weren't just like us.
They were not just like us.
Right. All that has changed now.
So in talking and looking at this topic, I thought that what I would find was this thing of like back off, back off, back off.
Right.
But it turns out that that's not really true. And I'm going to cite an article from Jenny Anderson. Fun fact, Jenny Anderson's brother married my cousin Grace. I have a familial connection to Jenny Anderson. Many American parents have no idea how their kids are doing in school. It's from Time Magazine. Nationally, 90% of parents think their children are reading and doing math at or above grade level. In fact, 26% of 8th graders are proficient or above in math. 31% are proficient or above in English. So basically, 60% of parents are wrong about how their kids are doing in school, and they fill in the blank that their kids are doing better than they think.
That's really interesting.
Super interesting. And I will say that we're solving for, in this case, I think, a range of kinds of parenting.
Right. And kinds of schools.
Socioeconomic situation that allows you to be super involved in your kid's school. And I think that it's fair to say that Amy and I are both college-educated women who are really dialed in to what's going on at our kids' school.
Right.
And it is interesting how you define the world as like, everyone's just like me. So the problem with people is, are they calling their school too much, or are they checking the portal too much? And Amy checks the portal and I don't. And those are the two sides of this debate. And in fact, that is 10% of this debate. That in fact, what's going on much more is that after the pandemic, kids have fallen behind grade levels because they missed 2 years of schooling.
Of at least in-person schooling, right.
At least
and
in-person
what they got
schooling
was not the same, right.
And that what people are finding is that report cards are not accurately reflecting grades. Super interesting, something I hadn't thought about. Gives me some things to think about for my own kids.
Wait, the report cards don't reflect grades, or they don't reflect the proficiency?
They don't reflect proficiency, I'm sorry. So they do reflect, they're the grades, but like a report card does not reflect what is actually going on with the kid's school experience, is what I'm trying to say. So going on in this article, 80% of parents say they are confident they understand how their child is achieving academically, and more than 3/4 say they feel their kids are prepared to enter and succeed at college and in the workplace. They don't seem to know there's a problem.
Well, there are schools, I know there are schools where, because I know administrators of those schools, where they're dying for parents to be more involved, to
Right.
care, to come to the events, to sign up for teacher conferences. So it is a socioeconomic thing we're talking to. It's the kids who are already doing well and have good schooling and have parents with the time and the resources and the wherewithal to contact the teachers who are being told to back off. And then there's other kids who might be struggling, who might have parents who really can't help them with their work and who don't understand.
Yes. And I want to gently push back because I don't think this is what you're trying to say on the word care in that sentence, like parents who
Yeah.
don't care. It's parents who are
They don't have the
over,
bandwidth.
they don't have the bandwidth. That's
Right.
it. And also, the inequity in schools across the United States is a huge part of this as well. That,
Mhm.
like, I know people who go to schools where they're learning, Farsi in high school. And I know people who go to schools where they are taking Microsoft Word for the 3rd year in a row as a high schooler. And so it's very hard to have a conversation about how involved parents should be when you're talking about ends of the spectrum. I would suspect that the majority of parents at a high school where, Farsi, Mandarin, Russian is taught as a language are extremely involved. And that at schools that are really not offering a proficient education to kids,
Mhm.
that parents are less involved because bandwidth may be smaller and also because the hurdles of that educational system are not individualized.
Or in like the case of my kids' high school that I was talking about before, it's just in the last year or two that they've realized, we're in New York City, that letters home to the parents need to be in English and in Spanish.
Right.
If
Right.
you don't speak the language that your kid is speaking at school, then you can't be more involved, even if you should.
Yeah, and I think also going back to this issue of grades reflecting proficiency, I do know 2 people who send kids to schools that are like college tuition type schools. They're spending $30,000 a year. And as the child got closer to college, they realized their child was 2 grades behind in reading. And it just was not being reflected in the kid. That grades can often reflect you're trying hard, the teacher likes you, you're handing in your homework in time. That there are things that grades sometimes reflect that don't accurately reflect what is going on with the kids' learning.
And it can sometimes be, I'm sure, a little bit of what the parents want to hear.
Yes.
That my daughter's high school gives out extensive written evaluations.
Mhm.
First about what the class is doing and then how my kid is doing. As these teachers write these evaluations, I'm sure there is a pull to write things that the parents want to hear so that they're not going to have a million emails and meetings. Your kid is doing great, for her, even though she really should be doing more homework. You know what I'm saying? Like they might need, I don't know for a fact this is true, but I can imagine that teachers in those written evaluations sort of pull their punches a little bit because they don't want blowback.
I think it's very complicated and it's very hard to individualize this problem because the fact that the teacher has the bandwidth to write a long written evaluation says something about the school. Firstly, there are schools that are extremely high-end and expensive where the parents expect results more than they want bad grades, right? Like
Right.
there are schools where people pay
Right.
$40,000 to send their kids and they don't want to hear an F coming back at them because
Right.
they're paying too much for that.
Right.
And there are schools where the entire grade is 3 grade levels behind. So to fail everyone is literally practical. So I want to pick up with this after this break. So let's turn for a moment to the idea of over involvement, because
Yeah.
maybe we're talking here. I don't even want to make it under involvement and over involvement because it has a certain judgmentalism. It's just like, okay, here's one problem that we're not keyed in to what the kids are actually doing. then certainly we have the problem of like we're over dialed in.
Right.
That we have ratcheted up the anxiety around this to such a large degree, and that it has become something of an arms race of like, you can follow the portal and find everything out about your kids, and you can click it 20 times a day, and you can see what your kid got on every single quiz or test. That seems to be creating a culture that Jennifer Brahaney Wallace talked about on our podcast, right? Where she wrote the book Never Enough: When Achievement Culture Becomes Toxic and What We Can Do About It. This is where I thought we were going with this episode.
Achievement
right?
culture.
Like, achievement culture, and everyone only cares about their kid going to Yale. That is like 20% of the educational system, and probably 2% of the huge educational problem that goes on in the United States.
Right.
What's really going on in the United States is that enough kids aren't getting a strong education. They're ending up grade levels behind. And that's probably a bigger problem. But both things are problems. And I think that, yes, you don't want your kid to feel like they are only truly loved when they get an A. You don't want your kids, which sounds kind of joking, but I mean, if your culture in your home is grades are the ultimate arbiter of who you are, and the kid is spending, you know, a huge part of their identity is being a student, you've got a problem. And I think people do feel huge amounts of pressure in this thing of education is about upward mobility, and college has now become, you know, the thing that defines how your kid is going to fare in life is where they're going to go to college. That this is also very understandable for parents. And it's exactly the thing that you were talking about, which is, okay, you're under-involved. How dare you? And you're over-involved. You stink. And you're ruining your kid's life with all this pressure.
Right. And part of it is, speaking as somebody with 3 older kids now and 1 kid in high school and 2 have already gone through high school, their high school work is much more sophisticated, speaking for me, than my own was. I think that is true for a lot of listeners to this podcast anyway, that our kids are doing in 7th grade, doing in 5th grade what they used to do in 7th grade, right? And by the time, like what they're doing as a sophomore in high school, you didn't figure out until college that you could read a text critically or whatever.
Right.
And it's hard.
That you could compare. I mean, my 10th grader is doing a comparison between the the Sun King Court of Versailles and the Tokugawa shogunate system of noblery. Like, that's college stuff, you know?
Yeah. I mean, I used to just copy pages of Encyclopedia Britannica in longhand and hand it in, pretty much. I was in high school. I just was telling my kid this, and she was like, you know, falling about laughing at me, that I wrote a paper in high school about Hamlet. And she said, what is it about? I'm like, it was about Hamlet. Hamlet is a play about, you know, it was like several, you know, written out sheets of loose leaf paper about like the plot of Hamlet.
Right. It wasn't like Hamlet, an allegorical journey into the plague of the 15th century.
Right. The role of the moon in Hamlet or whatever. You know, that's what she's doing. And I didn't learn that until college. And so she, you know, she is learning more sophisticated things, but it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that it's not very stressful and it's not a lot of work. And so then you see them struggle and you see them worry, and then you're like, oh, and that's when you start to be concerned.
And to some degree, when the work gets above their heads, I mean, I've definitely had the experience of teachers being like, well, we're doing 9th grade math in the 2nd grade. And I'm like, that is not useful. I mean, or going to the art show and everyone has made this Picasso drawing. And I just think, my kid was not that involved in whatever that is. That is not my kid's artwork. That is something, but it's not a reflection of my kid's ability. It's a reflection of, look at how great the art we produce is. And I think that's difficult. I think a good way to start the conversation here is about homework.
Yes.
Because we've talked about homework. I think one of our first 5 episodes was about homework on this podcast.
I think it was called like, is there too much homework?
Is there too much homework?
Yes.
And again, yes and no.
Okay.
But let's focus on the yes. So, how important is homework and how much should parents help? From kqed.org. Certainly concerns that homework gets in the way of physical activities and play. That we've talked so much on this podcast that if every single thing your child does during a day is structured and supervised by an adult, That's not great. That's
Yeah.
non-optimal, as we say.
Yeah. You're not getting to 1,000 hours outside if your kid has hours of homework.
And you're also just not getting into like learning the skill of independence and the gift of failure. Jess Leahy, our friend and who's been on the podcast, you're not, they are in such a, not even protective, because maybe sports is hard, but they're never out on their own figuring stuff out. Problem, something to look out for in your child's schedule. And this study shows that homework helps with proficiency in middle school and high school, but not in elementary school. So like elementary school homework, you really need to keep an eye on. Your kids should not be doing 2 hours of homework in elementary school. And you can tell them I sent you and they can call me.
There are kids for whom what was intended to be 20 or 30 minutes of homework is taking 2 hours. And that's when you should get involved with the school and talk to the teacher and just like gut check. How long do you think, open-ended question, how long do you expect these assignments to be taking? I've been in this position. And when I went to the teacher and they said, this is about 20 to 30 minutes, I'm like, okay, in our house, it's like 90 to 120 minutes. Oh, no. Right. And they were immediately completely re-racking. I want you to set a timer. I want the kid to stop when they get to 30 minutes and stop. And I want to see how much they're getting through in 30 minutes. And it was very helpful. And that was a time when I was glad I went to the school. But I think I went open-ended, non-accusatory. I'm seeing this issue and can you help me with it? And we did. But I had a teacher with bandwidth to help.
I've heard a teacher say homework is like a thermometer. Like, how's it going? Right. It's a review. We did this in class. Go take this home. Show that you understood what we did in class. Bring it back. So if you didn't understand it,
right,
and the dad fills it out for you, that's not helpful information for the teacher.
Right.
It's supposed to be showing what you learned. And so in elementary school, maybe there should not be no homework, but I think using that guide of, okay, you have half an hour to do your homework. What didn't get done? Okay, if none got done, you may have a kid with some attention issues that you need to dial in on. If half got done, okay, that's good to show the teacher, and that you can have a conversation back and forth in that. And I think that treating homework not as like the nuns said you must and we shall, and treating it as more of a thermometer for your kids. This is elementary school kids. And then homework in high school, their guide is not to exceed 1.5 to 1.5 to 2.5 hours per night for high school students, no more than 1 hour a night for middle school students. That may not sound realistic to some people. I think this is also a family values conversation, right? Like, I just sent my kid on a trip that he was looking forward to, and he missed a week of school. And it was important to me to have the conversation of, I think this trip is going to be very educational. I'd love you to keep a journal. I want this to be a learning experience for you. If you want to take this trip, it is going to involve double the amount of work when you get back to school to get taught up. Like, this is the parameters of our decision around education versus our lives. And I think sometimes we take ourselves out of that conversation and we feel like, well, education demands this, so we must, or our lives demand this, so forget the school. And that really, it's a conversation between the two places, home and school.
I think what's so hard, like just being on the side of teachers for a moment, I think there is not anybody listening, not you and me for sure, but there is a lot of entitlement among parents and kids. And like, this is how it's going to work, right? Like, and you can't, and then that same kid, a different kid that wouldn't be your kid, would take that week off to do something that might not have much educational value, but we're skiing out west, right? And we come back and this is way too much homework, and you can't possibly be expected to do this much homework, and then they don't do well on a test, and then the parents calling upset that they didn't do well on the test. Like, that happens too. And so I think it makes it harder. Parents come in loaded for bear a lot, I think. And then when you're contacting the teacher, it's sort of freighted with that, like, okay, usually this is how it goes, not knowing that when we do this, are going to be very polite and open-ended and asking for help. And they don't necessarily expect that. And so I think it can sometimes start at a heightened place, an adversarial place, because that's what they're expecting if you contact them.
Right. That it starts from a place. And And that we do lose perspective that like our one precious 7th grader who has these very specific needs and wants is one of 20 to 30 of that teacher's students.
Right.
And that
Or more. Right.
or more, and that teacher really cannot look out for the individualized needs of every single student in their classroom. And that when people come in with, well, this is our needs, you really have to be able to see it in the context of this is the needs of everybody in the classroom. And I
Right.
do think that the attitude, and it's something that I try to push back on, and I see it in my kids, and they're just like modern kids. It's not that they're monsters of, oh, this teacher this and this teacher that. And we do have a rule in our house. Like, I don't want to hear anyone talking badly about a teacher in our home. It's just not. That is still your teacher. Like, you may have an issue with them, even your bad nun, Amy. Like,
Mm-hmm.
you still have to approach it from the point of view of that is the teacher and this is the problem. And can we work out the problem with this person? But when we start with the point of view of from the parent or the child, this teacher is an idiot. Therefore, I just feel like we're not going anywhere good from
Yeah.
that place.
Yeah, I think you're right.
So let's close up on homework and talk about some guidelines around homework that I found helpful. Focus on providing general monitoring, guidance, and encouragement, but allow children to generate answers on their own and complete their homework as independently as possible.
Okay.
Agree, have not always been great at this. And by the way, if you have a kindergartner, you can just like tell them the answers because homework doesn't matter when you're in kindergarten. Only provide help when your child asks for it and step away whenever possible.
Okay.
So this is, I think, set up a place for I like for my kids to do homework at the dining room table while I'm cooking. So then I can kind of jump in if I'm needed, but basically I'm not sitting over their shoulder and doing it with them. And I think my husband struggles a little bit with this. He was a teacher and he likes to sit with them and like reteach it to them, which I think is fine. But I'm often like, just make sure they're really getting to the answer on their own, though. I think it can be very hard not to like lead the witness when you're helping too much with homework.
My kids' principal said when they were in grade school that in 4th grade that they should have an area on their own. If they didn't have their own room, then a desk in their room, like a place that they do homework away from the bustle of the house to make sure they're doing it independently, but also like the work's getting hard and they need to be able to develop independent study habits, which I thought was a good idea in practice. And yet I have some kids who loved that. And I had some kids who always wanted to be in the middle of the kitchen while you're making dinner. It ended up being a fight that I decided not to have. But having them in their own space makes it a little easier to make sure you're not getting over involved. But some kids want a little more
I
of that
have a kid who
emotional
does their
hand-holding.
homework in their room at a desk and I never see it.
Mm-hmm.
And then I have a kid who does homework right next to me because needs more support. Like that's just a call you make on your own, I think. Help your children create structure, develop routines. So this is scaffolding, right? Like, how do you best work? Is it upstairs in your room quietly? Is it, I have a child who does homework on Discord with his friends. And I listen in. They're not giving each other, but they're talking it through. I think that's fine. But the routine has to work for them. And that's also certain homework. It's more like group projects and stuff, or like talking through answers with peers. I'm fine with it. Communicate with your child and teacher about any problems your child has with homework and the teacher's learning goals. This is what you're talking about.
Yeah.
This is taking my kid 2 hours. Is that right?
Right. Right. Or the kids, just so you know, the 5th graders are doing their, history project together in a Google Doc or on Discord. And did you know that was happening?
Right. And does that work for you?
Does that work for you? Yeah.
But don't tell me it doesn't because I really don't want to get involved. All right. We'll be right back. So our time study from earlier says that parent, family, and community involvement in education correlates with higher academic performance, school improvement, improving students' behavior, attendance, and achievement. It also correlates with better social, emotional health.
Wow.
But Amy, you know what I like to say? What is this study really studying? And it's studying a lot of things. It's studying functional families. It's studying
Functional communication between the parents and the teachers instead of
yeah.
how dare you? Uh-huh.
It's studying I think a lot of it is studying income and how the school is doing in general. That like a community involvement in the school can be a sign of a high socioeconomic school community, and that it's not about people, it's about structures. That's what gets me about these studies.
Okay.
You understand what I'm saying?
Mm-hmm.
That like it's not about who cares the most, it's about who has the resources to be involved.
Yes.
So that being said, as we go back to Jenny Anderson's article in Time, Go Beyond Grades encourages parents to ask where their children are and to help them find the resources that they need. And so this is for kids who are maybe getting okay grades, but then their skills don't seem to be matching the grades that they're getting.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Number 1, ask the teacher if your child is on grade level. This is a question. I have a kid with an IEP and 2 kids who don't have IEPs. Grade level is extremely important in the IEP conversations, and I've never had the conversation about my other 2 kids. So I do not actually know the answer to this question for my kids. I assume the answer is yes, but I don't know, and I'm going to be asking.
Mm-hmm.
Be in the know about what is expected for grade level. And there are tons of resources, and we will link to them here. So it would be a good idea to familiarize yourself with grade level expectations in the United States. It's like developmental milestones, right?
Mm-hmm.
So understanding grade level expectations will help you see whether or not your kid is meeting those expectations. And the answer is not, and if they are not, that means all is lost.
Right.
But I think looking at these 2 things side by side might be a better arbiter for what is going on with your kid, their school, and their education than simply letter grades.
Mm-hmm.
And then 3, connect to programs that can help your child get the support they need, tutoring or after-school help, which obviously costs a lot of money. I have a kid in tutoring. I cannot believe how much money it costs.
And it requires parental involvement, right? Like so much for like stop being so involved parents. That's a lot of involvement required to figure out what support your kid needs, to get it, to then communicate with school about it, to see it through, to get them there every week.
Yes.
Hooray for parental involvement when it's required in that way.
Of course. So like parental involvement, which kind of becomes this straw man of like, oh my God, these kids go to college and people are calling the dean to check on their grades. Which, I would say is a problem, but I think that it's not the problem. The problem, yes, you should probably not be on your school's portal 24 hours a day and like, oh my God, if you don't get an A, all is lost. Probably not great. But also, it's not really it's a stereotype of a problem. It is not the actual problem that is going on in the U.S. educational system.
And I would also say, like, having seen multiple kids now through transitions to high school and then into college, like a lot of this, like, oh my God, look at this annoying parent who wants to know what size sheets they use on the bed in that dorm in July. Like, how dare this mother be asking? Like, that stuff goes away. That stuff is a little bit of the, it's a little bit of the separation anxiety looming, and you're way over involved in what choices your kid is making for like 2 weeks, and then they're launched and you feel better and it's not a big deal. I think that stereotype is a lot of like stuff that's over by September 15th.
Yeah, and very good and fair point. And that, right, you just cannot really get into playing the game of like, you do everything for your kids and then like, shut up, Mom, you're so pushy. It's like,
Right,
people,
right.
you can't win this argument, so maybe don't play.
Right.
Does parental involvement really help students? By Libby Stafford. Let's see.
Okay.
So her answer is that school-based involvement, participation in parent-teacher conferences, open houses, and other school events has a positive impact on academics in preschool, middle school, and high school, but the size of the impact was much lower in high school than preschool. This makes sense, right? I mean, this is everybody's experience. At preschool, you're there being the mystery reader for your 4-year-old. I have never set foot, I have a 10th grader, I've never set foot inside the high school other than to go to like a recital of
A
some
parent
sort.
night. Well, she says that's because the high school levels of involvement, there's many fewer opportunities and avenues to be, walking in and making cookies or whatever. That doesn't really happen in high school, and that is as it should.
Yes, because it's completely appropriate. That
Mm-hmm.
like your 4-year-old might need a lot of support to
Mm-hmm.
function well in preschool, your 5-year-old in kindergarten, even your 10-year-old in whatever grade that is. But yeah, by high school, I drop my kid off in the morning and I guess I check their grades, but I don't really have a lot of involvement in what's
Mm-hmm.
going on in my kid's schooling in high school, which seems appropriate.
Which would definitely be the high school student's preference, I assume.
Correct. And also, frankly, my preference.
Yeah.
At-home discussions and encouragement surrounding school have a positive impact on students' academic achievement at all developmental stages.
Oh, interesting.
It's our old friend, Amy, family dinners.
Yes, encouragement surrounding school. That's a little bit different than achievement pressure, I guess.
Encouragement and scaffolding versus achievement. Jennifer Berhaney Wallace talks about this as focusing on process over outcome, right? That the A isn't the important thing. The effort is the important thing. And that just sends a very different message to kids. One common form of parental involvement, helping kids with their homework, was shown to have little impact on students' academic achievement. This is also from Libby Stafford. We've seen earlier, this is mostly elementary school that it has no impact in.
Right, because if you're showing them how to do the division, it doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get it for the test because you help them with it on a homework on a Tuesday, I guess is what it's saying.
Right, that you're basically, they're learning it in school, they're coming home, you're showing them how to do it, they're filling in the answer, and then there's no actual learning taking place, and we might be missing some messages about the fact that they're not getting it.
P.S. You're not showing them how to do it the right way at all.
Oh, no, you're not chunking.
Right?
You're not grouping.
No,
You don't have number
not
sense.
chunking. Nope. Stay out of it.
In fact, she says, homework help had a small negative impact on student achievement, but positive impacts on students' motivation and engagement in school, according to the American Pediatric Association.
So it had a small negative impact on student achievement. Okay, so they might not do as well on the test if you help with the homework, but it helps them be motivated.
It's like it's the wrong kind of pressure, I think, is what it's trying to say, right? Like they stay really motivated, but maybe you're not actually helping them with the academic part of it.
Okay.
For our final conclusions, Amy, we turn to Slate's Care and Feeding panel, which is a panel of experts who answers questions at slate.com. And this is their most effective ways to advocate if you have a concern or an idea that feels worth pressing at school. There's a bunch of teachers and educators who are answering this question.
Okay.
I like this. Start with the staff member most relevant and directly involved with the issue you'd like to discuss.
Right. Don't start with the principal.
Start with the principal, friends. Don't don't go above the person who has the problem. This is tempting to do, especially when you're mad. Don't do it.
If it's logistically possible for a sticky conversation, aim for an in-person meeting or a phone call because email tone can be tough. Agreed.
That's right. And then she goes on to say, a heads up message about what you'd like to discuss. Because we have this sometimes on our work Slack where I'll say to someone, I need to meet with you at 4. And it means I have this one question I need you to answer, but the person has spent the whole day being like, oh my God, what did I terribly do wrong that I'm being called to a meeting at 4? So I have a little joke on our Slack that I'll put a happy face, like it's fine or whatever.
Right.
My dad used to do this. He would call and be like, it's your father, call me. And I'm like, are 86 members of the family dead? Like, what is happening? And he's like, no, I just needed you to call me back because I want to know if you wanted pizza or pasta, And yes, give a nice heads up. Like, you want to basically signal, I come in peace.
Right. Or it's the opposite version of how everybody says when the school calls.
Right.
When you answer the phone, like it's so-and-so from blank school, everything's fine. They know to do that. It's like, can you have a different caller ID? Like school, everything good.
School, oh no.
Right. It's that panic. I never really thought about that. And I hope that when I contacted that teacher many moons ago to say homework is taking way longer than I think you think it's taking, that I gave them a heads up of the topic. I hope I did that. That's good advice.
Final advice, which I think is really good. In terms of what to bring to the conversation, less is more, a clear message, prioritized asks, and to the point rationale.
You come with the problem and the potential solution.
Yes. This is a big Amy thing, and I love it. Say
Right?
more about that.
Just like this homework is taking forever, and like, oh no, it's not supposed to be taking that long. Like, well, that's what I thought. So I came in and I thought maybe we should just do part of it, or should we do more on the weekends? And then they were like, no, I want you to do it. Set a timer and stop when it gets to this point, and show me where they stopped. It's not that my solution was the solution. It's that instead of just coming like, this is way too much homework, right? That's not coming with the problem and the solution. That's just the problem. So I thought we might try X, and then let them come up with the real solution. But you're coming in collaboratively instead of accusingly.
And I think the overarching issue that is being addressed here is our favorite. Operate from a place of maximum generosity. I had a conflict with one of my kids' teachers, and it was a teacher who was going to be with this kid for a long time. And the first two interactions were extremely, hostile or sparky, let's say. Just not terrible, but hot, I would say. And my mom gave me the advice of, you need to make her part of the solution, not part of the problem. And you go in and say, and it worked great. Like, you are such an amazing teacher. You are so into, here's where I'm struggling. How can you help me with this problem? It was transformative, as opposed to going in and saying, hi, comma, you idiot, here's what you're doing wrong. And this is just practical advice. This is not moral advice. This is not how to be a person advice. This is practical advice that you come with the possibility that you can both solve the problem together. I mean, are there completely maniacal, evil teachers out there somewhere? Probably. But most teachers are probably, the problem is coming from a lack of bandwidth. If there's something, I recently had an issue with something that was being presented that I thought was problematic, shall we say. And I was like, here's the thing. I think this isn't great. I'm going to opt my kid out of it. If there's any issue, let me know. This is just my own personal choice. I didn't come at it from the point of view of, you dopes, why are you doing this?
My one wild and precious child.
Don't pour gasoline on a situation. It's a power struggle. You know what I mean? And the end of the day is, these people are with your kid all day. So you can make it a war, but you're not on real solid ground for the war. So you might as well make it a treaty.
Yes. We solved it.
We solved all things education.
Amazing.
And we will never have a problem again in this area.
Yes. Very well
Friends,
done.
we keep reminding you, we're going to do it one more time. Make sure you're subscribed and following the podcast wherever you listen. They're always changing the apps and not delivering it. Say to your friends, hey, are you still getting What Fresh Hell? You had to re-opt in at some point.
Just grab their phones and subscribe them and follow them wherever they're listening.
Don't grab their friends. That would be illegal. Grab their phones. Probably
Phones
also
fine.
illegal, but go ahead. Follow and subscribe wherever you listen. We so appreciate it. And with that, we'll talk to you next time.
So long.